And then I have 1 or 2 slides here on the Norwegian krone. It's been getting a lot of attention because it's not been following the fundamentals, that it's been misbehaving, if you will, relative to a lot of fundamental measures. One of those being oil. So here you see oil in this sort of purple line. It was still a very high price for a long time, then started falling. And the trade weighted Norwegian krone, the black line. We can get into why this happened here. That had to do with the Norwegian krone being overvalued back here, but whatever. You can see how it, many people watch oil for the reasons why the Norwegian krone goes up and down. But wow, quite a divergence here that requires some explanation. And in fact, I've built some pretty simple models that try to indicate what euro versus the Norwegian krone should be trading. Here's the actual euro versus Norwegian krone in blue. My model, that is a simple interest rate spread plus oil model, suggests that it actually should be at the lower end of the range of the last couple of years plus. And if I include gas, by the way, gas is equal to oil in terms of the value of exports in Norway now. That's how much their gas has grown and their oil has shrunk. Suggests about the same, certainly lower relative to the current price. Instead, euro-NOK is making all-time highs. What gives? And I'm not sure I know, but some things that we could point to that might be the reason is their so-called mainland GDP, which is their GDP without, but they try to maintain a GDP measure without their oil sector. It's growing at 2.5%, pretty decent. There's a lot of places in the world that are growing 2.5%, but it's only growing at 2.5% despite budget deficits, in other words, fiscal stimulus of 8% of GDP. If you take out the money they're earning off of their oil. That's a very large budget deficit to be running, and it's not sustainable especially if oil prices start to go down. I think that's one of the reasons. So an underlying weak economy, even though the growth is still there, it's being bought at the cost of lots of stimulus. And then I think there's a structural worry about the housing market, which is showing signs of exhaustion and showing signs of turning around. And if you look at the U.S. and the UK experiences with housing bubbles when they correct, and even in Europe, Spain, etc., where does the debt end up after a housing crisis? So the banks have it now, right, against the mortgage holders, those that are living in the homes and have issued the debt to buy the homes. You have a housing crisis, what happens? Are people thrown on the streets? Of course not. Are their debts written off? The banks don't like that. Are they simply allowed? Everyone's simply allowed to default. It would, kill the banks. It would kill the economy or the financial system. No. So what happens? They print a lot of money, and it all ends up on the government's balance sheet, so that private sector debt gets shifted to the public sector and ends up being in Norwegian sovereign bonds, if you will. As well, I think there's an element of people looking long term that Norway is not competitive without fossil fuels, and eventually they are slowly running down certainly the oil, the natural gas is going to take a lot longer to run down. And they're not competitive, and they're showing signs of not wanting to expand exploration because of the greenhouse gas impact.